The most important decision that you as a CEO take in your organization is who you appoint to first-line manager position. Leadership isn't about deciding what to do as much as it's about deciding what not to do. But when you don't have self-awareness, you spend too much time on things you shouldn't be doing. Now, what a self-aware leader does is learn when to back off to give the team control.
Welcome to Escape the CEO Doom Loop, where we talk with real-world CEOs about the challenge of building a great business without losing your vision, energy, or sanity. I'm John Nakovich, joined by my co-host and business coach, Glenn Dahl. Today, we're joined by Barry Conchie, founder and president of Conchie and Associates, as well as the author of the book, The 5 Talents That Really Matter, How Great Leaders Drive Extraordinary Performance. Super excited to have you spending some time with us today, Barry, and our listeners. Can you provide an overview of your work at Conchie Associates and what inspired you to write the book, The 5 Talents That Really Matter?
Be delighted to do that, John, and welcome, Glenn. Good to meet you too.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Barry. Thanks for being on.
The 5 talents that really matter describe the breadth of what we do within Conchie Associates. So we are a small boutique executive and full-scale assessment company that helps companies reduce hiring mistakes and find better people. We do that through research assessments. And when we research, we publish our findings in books, articles, and so on. And we work with a select group of clients who are recommended to us. We don't advertise, we don't call people, we don't go looking for work. We're happy for people to come to us, and that's how we build, grow our business. And at the age of 68, I can tell you, I've never had as much fun in my life as I'm having right now. And I've said that for the last 15 years, I've been running my company.
Can I ask you a question before I'll let Glenn get to our signature question? But you and I worked together at Gallup, and I was there from 2006 to 2008. It was a good learning opportunity. I know you were there for quite a while and were really a preeminent thought leader there. What was the impetus for you to go kind of create your own organization, go start a company on your own and get to the point you're at today where you're enjoying yourself so much?
I was particularly dumb in a very significant way. And that is, it took me a long time before I figured out that clients were booking me and not Gallup. As soon as I made that realization, I thought, well, let's cut out the middleman and go direct. And that's exactly what I did. So I took my expertise with me. I've built and developed that expertise. And as a result, I've ended up in a situation where I don't look back with any regrets at all, other than I should have done it years earlier.
That's funny. I feel the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, Barry, one follow-up question to that. So the 5 talents that really matter, John originally recommended the book to me. We had breakfast down in Marco Island, Florida.
Yeah.
And so I downloaded it and started listening to it on my walks on the beach down there. Barry, I'm curious, what inspired you to write this book and on this particular book?
So there were probably 4 intersecting trains of thought that led to us wanting to write this book. And this book has been in my mind for over 8 years, Glenn. It took 8 years to the point where I felt I could sit down and write it, and then wrote it in about 2.5 months, front to back, because it was so embedded in my thinking.
Wow.
There were a number of different motives for writing the book. The first was, there is so much garbage written about leadership out there that I just wanted to put a marker in the sand. And, for those of you that are interested, I've actually named some very significant authors, some highly popular books, and picked apart why they're actually on a very weak foundation or on no foundation at all. So I wanted to correct the record in that sense. The second is that practices for human selection are woefully backward. And people don't understand how to make better appointments. They talk using the word talent, but they don't know what it means. So if you don't know what it means, you can't measure it. And the message I wanted to put out there with my colleague Sarah Dalton was, if you look at leadership this way and you analyze it this way, and then you think of ways of asking the right questions, you can actually reduce the errors that you're already making. So the second aspect was, can we improve overall approaches to selection and give people very, very good guidance that keeps them out of jail, because some practices are in fact illegal, but at the end of the day, help you to make better appointments. The third aspect was we gathered all this data. We had, at the time of the book, over 58,000 C-suite executives from around the world. We had assessment data on them. We had performance data, a whole lot of demographic data. And for me, that's a lot of fun. You can start running data sets against each other to see what you find. And, that was the essence of the 5 talents. I mean, the 5 talents emerged from that 58,000 leadership database analysis. It seemed only reasonable for us to put that out as a point of education and say, look, I don't know what you think about leadership or how you think about leadership, but these are the things that really matter. So I remember getting into this conversation with this very, very well-known CEO of a very large company in the US. He said, humility is missing. He said there should be 6 talents. I said, define humility. He defined it in vague terms of someone who uses the word a lot but doesn't really know what it means. Okay. So humility to him was not speaking first in a meeting. It was standing back in the shadows, pushing people forward, all those kinds of things. Passing praise to other people, all that kind of stuff. Then I said, here's your problem. It's not that humility isn't desirable. It clearly is. It's that it's non-predictive. He said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, there have been some silly books written over a long period of time extolling the values of humility, one of them being Good to Great by Jim Collins. And as a result of that, a lot of smart people have learned how to say certain things to fill people they're more humble than they are. When you measure humility at the level of the brain, in terms of how people think, it's non-predictive. That means it doesn't matter how much you've got. It adds nothing to the weighing scale on the positive side of making a selection decision. I said, think of this. However, if you measure the things that really matter, then you get a positive reading over here. Then humility is additive. So humility is not important. It's in and of itself, it's non-predictive.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's, and Barry, even before we've got a signature starting question, but I think it would be really great, Barry, because for people who could listen to the podcast, hopefully will listen to the podcast, who are C-suite leaders and other leaders, maybe they haven't read the book yet. They certainly will after this. But what are the 5 talents that really matter? Would you mind breaking those down a bit for us before we launch into some other stuff?
Number 1, setting direction. This is plotting a future course. And in terms of leadership, that means long-term vision, long-term goals, objectives, keeping people directed towards those. And obviously people do that in different ways, but the requirement for direction is absolutely key. The second one we call harnessing energy. And the analog to harnessing energy is the city manager of a power plant producing electricity to a whole bunch of customers in a city, right? But if you imagine walking into the main operation room in that power plant, imagine what you're going to see. Well, you're going to see dials and dashboards. You're going to see a lot of activity. You're going to hear a lot of noise. You're going to feel energy being switched from over here to over here. As you look at the analog for that into leadership, it captures the energy that certain leaders bring to the table. Are they measuring what's important? Are they really controlling the pressure within the organization so you get an optimal outcome? So harnessing energy was number 2. Number 3, changing people's minds, influencing them. If you don't have influence as a leader, you're an individual contributor. I mean, you've got to influence people. You've got to change their minds. You've got to get them to do things that without you being there, they otherwise wouldn't choose to do. It might be helping a person make the right decision about their future career by leaving the organization and going somewhere else. A 4th talent is increasing connectivity. And the idea there is that it's pointless executive leaders being connected to each other if they don't reach beyond and bring the entire organization with them. So within the building connectivity, it's establishing a network of connections across an organization that facilitates work progress. So if you can think of a project that you're asked to join as an executive in an organization, you don't know anybody or don't know everybody, you pay a price in time until you figure out those connective issues that help you work more effectively with this person than you did before. So this is all about growing your network, increasing your reach, certainly at depth and breadth in the organization. Too many executives work horizontally and they touch the depths of their organization. The fifth one is controlling traffic. Now, I get annoyed when I hear people referring to executive leaders as keeping the trains running on time. I'm to death of that analogy for two reasons. In business, the tracks aren't fixed. They go all over the damn place and they're completely unpredictable. When you're running trains, you got to run them to a schedule and make sure they don't crash. So we use the analogy of an air traffic controller, where you're dealing with so many imponderables, so many things that could go wrong. And every problem you encounter is likely to be unique. And you've got to be able to build systems for the predictable part. And you've got to show variability for all the variable elements that can hit you, whether it be weather, crews being out of time, aircraft malfunction, all of the above. And that's what executive leadership is like. It's like managing an organization where you've got to make sure there's a productive outcome, but you're dealing with so much unpredictability along the way. So those are the 5 talents, Glenn.
Okay. Very good. Thanks for filling us in, Barry.
Yeah.
All right. Here's a question, Barry, that we're going to start off. When we have everybody guest on our podcast, we'll maybe ask with a different spin from your perspective. But I think you're aware that John and I participated in a project a few years ago where we interviewed a bunch of CEOs, 72 CEOs. Some of the things that emerge, and also based on our insights working with our clients and what we've seen in our careers, is really great leaders or high quality leaders on a leadership team have a difficult time working for a CEO who is not a great leader. And what we found is the CEOs who maybe aren't great leaders or have kind of overreached, I guess, in their business plateau. They're running their business. Maybe the business has grown to be something larger than maybe their leadership skills are, right, from an entrepreneurial standpoint to a larger company. And they will start getting to what we found to be the CEO doom loop, or what we call the CEO doom loop. And that's a phenomenon where the CEO will start, instead of leading, will start engaging in counterproductive behaviors within their business. And in times of distress, say there's an issue, people issues, business issues. And so that's the CEO doom loop. And it's basically where a leader, instead of being the leader of the organization and leading a leadership team, they'll start regressing and working back in the business. And many times it's from the place of where they came. And so in my instance, as a CEO, I came up through sales and marketing. And I found myself as a CEO when times got stressful, I would tend to dive back down into that. And on reflection, I really didn't even understand what my job was as the CEO of this company. So that's the CEO doom loop. And one of our things that John and I took out of that is, in plus and observations, is that those people who rise to the head of the organization but may not be great leaders have a difficult time building a really great leadership team, because many people are not attracted. If they're great leaders, they don't want to work for someone who is not a great leader. That's the doom loop. So just curious, how have you seen that? Would you agree with our observations on that? And how does that play into your research?
There are so many questions I would want to ask Glenn before I could answer it. But I mean, one of them would be, how was that CEO selected? And at the time they were selected, what was the prediction? Now,
Yeah.
CEOs fail without a doubt. And, one of the puzzling things for me is that the CEOs who failed were top of a search firm's search. And they were given fantastic references. And yet here we are, they're not doing very well. So I would go back to the source and say, so on what basis were they selected? And were any of these things predictable at that time? The second thing I would probably want to look at is this just a recent phenomenon? Or have we seen signs of this developing over time? Now, you might look, for example, at the larger tracking employee engagement indices to see whether or not the company has been tracking steadily downward, particularly towards the top of the company over a period of time, which would tend to suggest that this is more systemic and long-term rather than short-term and more immediate. But if it is short-term and more immediate, it's got a better chance of being corrected because, what are they going through? Death of a spouse, family separation, health trauma, or things of that kind where, it throws them for a loop and they can't think clearly. They can't put their full time into the job. And therefore that short-term stuff, it might just need to be given time to kind of work through. But so there are a number of variables there that lead me one way or the other in terms of my opinion about what I think of the doom loop. Now, let me trade one of those questions and talk about the doom loop. So let's assume that they started out well and then started to deteriorate. That deterioration didn't happen in a year. It happened over a period of time. That doom loop to me sounds predictable because it doesn't have that stop-start feel to it. It doesn't have that flip of the switch feel to it where, CEO was great up until Thursday, and then sort of last Thursday to flip everything to hell in a handbag. So therefore, you will have seen some indications of this over a period of time. Now, to your question, have I seen this? I've never called it the doom loop before, but I've seen some shockingly bad CEOs. And I've seen some average CEOs that I put into the same category, even though they might be a little bit better in a number of respects. Now, here's a question you should ask. And it's a more broader question than just the doom loop. But just how many leaders have got the capacity to be excellent? How many?
Mm-hmm.
That's a fascinating question, and we need to get an answer to it.
I think you have some data for that.
We absolutely data. That's what happens, John, that I could reach into a few spreadsheets and pull that out for you. What we found, having assessed now 61,000 C-suite executives, is that if you quartile their scores across our assessment and just look at the top quartile, only 4% of 61,000 CEOs or leaders sit in that top. 4%. So that means that our prediction, more generally, is that for every 100 executives or CEOs that we look at and assess, only 4% are going to have the capability to be great. That's not how boards and leaders look at their organizations. Their standards are way lower than that. And that's why too few companies are breaking away from their competitors. They're led by okay, mediocre kind of people, but they aren't world class. And then lo and behold, I ran that data back in November last year. Oh goodness, it's nearly a year ago now. Anyway, in January of 2025, a very significant research paper came out. And that research paper looked at individuals showing a capacity of excellence who have themselves different personality traits and dispositions. What is the overall capacity for excellence? They gave a figure out of 1 million, and they said 84 people in 1 million have the capacity for excellence in whatever activity they target themselves towards, right? Now, if I was to be a ballet dancer, I wouldn't be in that 83. Right? I'd be in all of the others that make up the 1 million, right? So it means that the way we've been talking about leadership, and you use doom loop, I would encourage you to think that it's not a loop, it's a freaking ginormous crater of incompetence. But it's changed my perspective and other people's perspectives around leadership. I think the bar's way too low. I think we're too happy satisficing around standards, which means we are perfectly okay to go right the way down to the mean of a database and say, seems a nice person, let's give them the job. And we're not doing anything towards raising that bar towards excellence. And as a consequence, we've got all these people swirling the drain. I mean, your doom loop to me is the equivalent of swirling the drain.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
People have reached the end and are going to get flushed down into the sewer, and don't let the plug hole hit you on the head. I think my attitude about the doom loop is I twist it around a little bit because I feel I have to. And the biggest problem is we don't have the right standard set for what a good leader is.
So let me ask you a follow-up question on that. So the doom loop, I've been a CEO 3 times. Glenn's been a CEO a couple of times, and we go do this research, right? And you think what the doom loop really meant to our participants, and we didn't know what this was going to be, but really it was the human side of being a CEO or being a leader. Being a CEO is a really hard job, and there's a lot of days that are great, and there's a lot of days that it's really hard being a CEO. You lose a key customer, you don't have enough cash, lose a key member of your team, right? You're dealing with a lot of kind of negative stuff that's happening in the business a lot. And the doom loop is really this thing where you kind of get piled on as a leader, right? Things aren't going the way you want. You're struggling. You're not growing the way you want to. You got a dysfunctional board. All the stuff that happens in business all the time. So the doom loop is this place that people can go at times when they're just struggling. And I'll be honest with you, it's one of the reasons I had to coach in 2 businesses that I ran. And he brought a methodology for how we would, do strategy and execute all that stuff, which is phenomenal. But what was more valuable for me is that those days that things were a struggle, I maybe doubted myself, didn't know exactly what the right thing to do was. When I could talk to him and we would have these conversations, he would reframe me in a way like, I got this. I know what I'm doing. I just needed that help. So when you think about the 5 talents that really matter and the human side of being a CEO or a leader of any kind, they're not all great days. No matter how good you are, no matter how talented you are, you're going to have shitty days. So how do the 5 talents that really matter tie into the human side of being a CEO?
It's a little bit more of a complicated question than that, John, because in the book, we point out that you don't need to be brilliant at all 5 areas in order to be a really strong leader.
Yeah.
So we're not looking for perfection. Now, that doesn't mean people don't think they're perfect. We've got people in our database who think they're good at everything. And my conversations with them are extremely short because I can't help perfect people. But the vast majority of people, guys, they are deficient in some fairly significant areas. And what's important is that they know what those areas are. Now, we don't spend a ton of time trying to fix those areas because, we're measuring fairly static constructs in the brain. Those things are rather impervious to the kind of change that people hope they can inflict on themselves. So instead, what we do is say, how do we optimize your capability? And we focus on 2 things. The first is, are you behaving consistent with your capabilities? Or are you trying to prove yourself in areas where you're not very good? Now, we never hear fantastic answers to that question, but obviously we're leading them to think that if only they focus their capabilities around things that they're brilliant at, that at least will optimize their upper capability. And then the second we have who have you got around you? Have you built the team that the natural complement in terms of dispositions, traits, and characteristics that enable us to feel that they can optimize your leadership by filling in the blanks? So let's say we've got a trigger happy CEO who wants everything yesterday, can't wait to get started, but he's clearly very opportunistic and operates on assumption, belief, and is very quickly able to convince themselves that they're right. So you think of that CEO, you better surround that CEO with a bunch of deep thinkers with sledgehammers. Now, the deep thinkers is obvious. If you've got deep thinkers, then you want those deep thinkers to be slowing the CEO up and saying, well, you've not considered this, or you could do that. Realize how crazy that part of your plan is. And the sledgehammer is for when they don't listen. Because if you've got a very, very forthright, very determined, very assertive CEO, first of all, it takes a lot of guts to stand up to them in the first place. And the second thing is, they might run roughshod over you and you got to get their attention. So, so I would start there in terms of that answer, John, by saying, how do the 5 talents help in that situation? It's everybody's different. You need to understand the differences. Then you need to build a team where those differences are complemented by the people around you And you need to make sure the CEO is attentive to that kind of feedback so that they listen and don't just disregard it at all. Now, if they disregard it, what you'll see is a steady turnover trickle over years at the exec level with no obvious reason. And yet the obvious reason is the elephant in the room. It's the CEO and won't listen. And it's funny, I'm just bringing out a research paper on how complex but complementary thought processes can enhance the performance of a leadership team. So that's where you pick people with very, very different ways of thinking. They'll have other different characteristics too, of course. But arguing the point that I'm making to you now that, it's not one thing, but once you've identified the cause of the issue, nearly always comes back to a homologous thinking style across a group. And there are ways that you can spot this. It really is easy to spot. I mean, you don't need a fancy assessment or someone with half a brain like me. You can do this yourself. And the first thing is this: the CEO who's swayed by the most recent person who's spoken to them. That's a characteristics of a problem within a team, because for a CEO to accept that kind of behavior and then act on it is indicative that there aren't very many strong thinkers on the team. Otherwise, they wouldn't allow that to happen. The second is, what I call a lazy thinking syndrome. And this is where people pile on to a plausible idea because it's easier doing that than doing heavy thinking yourself, right? So you're meeting and somebody says, why do you think we don't do such and such? And somebody goes, hey, I'm with you. That's a really good. And before you know it, half the team's saying, let's go ahead with X. Whereas really what's happened is the person who spoke up initially had a vague idea of a problem, but couldn't quite articulate it. And nobody else was prepared to do all the heavy thinking to validate it. It was just easier to agree. That is very, very easy to spot. And if you're in a leadership team meeting and the team rapidly agrees on any issue, that's a major problem. Now, there was a very famous case back in the late 1920s. Goodness, I wish I could remember the name of the guy. CEO of General Motors, sitting in an executive leadership team meeting, getting ready for a board presentation on GM's new strategy for halting Ford's expense. No, he sat there with all of the men around the room, because there were about 24 of them, and the CEO was there. And what had happened is they'd all listened to like 24 or 23 presentations where each executive with the teams behind them were saying, in order to beat Ford, we should do whatever it was. Okay. Every single presentation was given. The CEO stopped the meeting at the end, said, thank you, gentlemen, all of your efforts. I would now like you to recognize that it seems as a team, we all agree. We've all talked fundamentally about the right issue, and you've all talked about exactly the same issue. Now go back to your businesses, do your heavy work, and come up with reasons why we shouldn't do this. And the room kind of fell silent, and everybody recognized the problem, right? They'd been building scaffolding around one idea. Now, it was brilliant. Couldn't criticize it. The scaffolding held plate. It wasn't going to get blown over in the wind. And the reason for that is a lot of smart people contributed to its construction. And he turned around, recognized the problem. We're all thinking the same way. Now go away, come up with different ways of doing it. So as I look, therefore, John, at your question around how the 5 talents relate to, the kind of swirling drain that you described in your doom loop, it's going to be different combinations of talents for different situations. I think the doom loop is predictable, by the way, eminently predictable. So in our database, there are 38% of leaders in our bottom quartile. I think that's 4 out of every 10 applicants. Now, my point there is, I think that's the doom loop predictor, hard and fast. So if you want to say to me, how do we get this way? Why does it happen this way? I don't think it's a choice. I think it's a lack of capability. And I think that capability takes a little bit of time before it gets flushed out and exposed. But the bottom 40% of our database would be massively predictive of the doom loop. And these are CEOs that you should be appointing.
Good stuff. Thanks, Barry.
Yeah. So your work with companies, how much of it is at the behest of a CEO who would say, hey, I want you to assess our leadership talent and I want to improve our leadership at our company. So using Conchie and Associates, come in and we'll do this, do the assessments, and then, what comes next? And one of the questions I have is what comes next? Is it, what if that CEO, you come back and say, you're not a good leader according to the assessment and our database and what we found, you're a pretty poor leader. How does that concept, I guess that actually has two questions in one. One is how does your work help the company or the CEO to improve that? But also the side part of the question is what if it is the CEO and you have that conversation with them?
Well, the top level answer to your first question is we work with boards finding CEOs. And then more broadly, we build assessments across the entire soup to nuts of an organization, from entry level people, first time managers, managers of managers, salespeople, sales managers, all right. So I would send the CEO, what's your objective here? What problem are you trying to solve? Now, if they turn around to me and say, look, Board has kicked me up the backside on succession planning. I've never really presented a very compelling answer to that. We need help with succession planning. And I stop them at that point and say, that's not succession planning, that's selection. We can help you with selection, but making a series of one-off decisions, potentially fill vacancies at the top of the organization, does not constitute a succession plan. I said a succession plan requires something like an 8-year commitment. And then the CEO's face drops. They say, 8 years? I got to get this done by February, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to have a succession plan in February, but we can have a set of selection decisions lined up for you to talk to the board. But here's what I'm thinking of when I talk about a succession plan. The most important decision that you as a CEO take in your organization is who you appoint to first line manager position. The most important job. And so the reason for that is that in the 8 years, it takes a few of those to climb that ladder to get visibility to the exec team. That's the pond you're fishing in. Now, if you constrain that pond significantly at the point of entry, where certain people become first-time managers, you're screwed at executive level, because when you look to the pool that they've grown up in, nowhere near good enough. It's nowhere big enough. It's not expansive enough. You've not fed them the right food. You've not given them the right opportunities. You've not shown them other ponds that they could also fish in and grow in. I said, it takes 8 years to fix that. Now, in partnering with us, here's how it's going to work. We require a commitment to the 8-year journey, period. Because otherwise you're not serious. And if you're not serious, we don't want to work with you. But if you're serious and you make that commitment, in the intervening time, we'll help you make better exec level decisions, vacancy by vacancy by vacancy. But if you don't start with where the problem begins, you're never going to solve. So you don't take action, or who becomes frontline managers. 8 years' time, that's your pond. Now, if you didn't make good decisions at the beginning, it's extremely unlikely that they're going to flourish to be geniuses by the time they're visible to the exec level. So let's work to fix the problem. Now, right now, it might be, I don't know, if you do all the counting and you count cumulatively over those 8 years, out of 38,000 potential people who could make it to visibility of the exec team, there might only be about 4 of them. What if we could upgrade that 38,000 people year by year by year by year? Now, we actually find about 70%, but let's just say we found 10%. By the time that works through to 8 years' time, you're going to have 40 to 50 candidates that you could choose from rather than 4. Now, what if we could get over to 50% in the first year by making better hiring at that level? Could we get to the point where you might get 200 people in visibility of the exec team with a reasonable shot at being appointed? Now, that's the 8-year journey. That gets me excited. And I love it to engage with companies that way. But, we're prepared to kind of do a hybrid approach. Now, your last question was the most interesting. And that is where we make a determination on a CEO. We do that all the time, Glenn, and we refuse to work with some companies. And I'm very honest with them. We'll get a call, we'll have a conversation, and I'm trying to figure them out. They're trying to figure me out. If they don't want to work with us, fantastic, because I don't want to work with them. That's very, very easy. We never want to work with people who don't want to work with us. That's such an easy decision. And I'm thrilled if they don't talk to us after the first conversation, because I'm as direct as could be. And the reason is I'm trying to figure out whether they can take it or not. If they can't take a direct conversation from me, they can't work with me, period. But let's say we go down the discussion route and we get close towards the end. I've had many occasions I've turned around and say, we're not going to go ahead with this. We're not going to submit a proposal. And it's nearly always shock. Like, we've had these conversations, how could you not want to work with us? And I've got to sit down and say, it's because of you. I don't think I can work with you. And the reason I don't think I can work with you is I don't think you can cope with me. And the worst thing to do would be for us to sign a business relationship and get 2 years into it and realize we're not on the same page on anything. Nothing I can do will be right, and nothing you can provide me will be additive. So let's just not go ahead. And I've done that quite a few times. Now, if you wind it another step forward, let's say during the first year of engagement, I've had quite a number of come to Jesus meetings in that first year, sat down and said, look, we made these commitments and you're not honoring them. Or, look, nobody's perfect as a CEO, but when we sit down and I give you advice, I'm not giving you advice to ignore it. I'm giving you advice to act on it. Now, if you don't want to do what I advise you to do, let's have a conversation about why, and then maybe I can help you present an argument that's more credible than the one that I think you've got right now. So we sometimes have those, look, let's just realign, let's crack our heads together, and then let's go from there. So that engagement, Glenn, at the top level is it's a wonderful thing. We can't succeed without it. We see tons of variability, but we walk away from so many deals. And by the way, we fire clients quite regularly. We've just got rid of 2 more the last couple of weeks where, we look at the activity, we look at the progress, there's no commitment. The things they said they would do, they are not doing. We politely withdraw. But all the time, we're looking to gravitate towards organizations that want to counteract your deal limit.
So Barry, I'd like to ask you a question about talent. You'd mentioned when we started that most people don't understand talent. So one of the things when we were at Gallup, they talked about strengths, right? So develop your strengths, right? And you talk about talent. Do you see strengths and talent as the same thing? Is talent something that is innate in you? Can it be developed? What's that look like? And I have a question like, if I put the 10,000 hours in, can I improve on a talent? Can I improve on one of the 5 talents as an example? So can you give us a kind of a very Conchie overview of how you think about those things?
Quick 3-minute overview of issues that I'd love to spend a couple of hours on each, John.
Yeah, I know.
Talents and strengths are the same. No, that they are related. So both posit that there are certain unchangeable or difficult to change characteristics in people that either enhance or inhibit their capacities. So I guess in that sense, at the theoretical level, they are very similar. The reason why strengths, as you and I used to know it within Gallup, isn't comparable to talent as we measure it, for example, in our assessment, is that those strengths are non-predictive and they are incomparable. So you can't make a prediction based on some, like StrengthsFinder. You can't say with these particular themes, for example, you're going to be a great leader. And the reason for that is that the tool wasn't built for that. It was built for more generic work habits and whether or not, people understood those work habits within the context of other people. So talents and strengths are different. Now, talents are characteristics, traits, dispositions in people that are very difficult to change over time. They're not impossible to change, but they're really, really difficult. They're things that occur at a point in ourselves that we don't really think about. We don't have to put a conscious effort in. Now, for me, I've got to try really hard to be nice. It's not easy for me. I like to spend time on my own. If people come up to talk to me, I try to get away. So I've got to put a lot of energy into not sending negative signals towards people. And I would reckon about 90% of the time I fail. But I've got a pretty good talent for communicating complex ideas. And then I'm drawing people in and I'm really engaging with their brains. And that to me is a lot of fun. Now, none of that is picked up on StrengthsFinder. And you couldn't look at StrengthsFinder results to make that prediction. But you could look at our assessment results of executives and absolutely make that prediction.
I love that. I've used the analogy before. If you took Michael Jordan and I love basketball, and you take Michael Jordan and I, neither one of us have picked up a basketball before, and you put us through X amount of training, right? He would just be so much better than me always because of his innate talent, right? I can work really hard, but I would never get to his level of performance just because of, I think what you're saying is he was predisposed, he's pre-wired to have those native talents, right? Those are obviously physical and some mental talents that he had that made him so great. So awesome.
Barry, you talked before, and I think I understood where you were going, but you can't help a CEO who's perfect, right? You said, if you talk with someone and they're already perfect, like you can't help them. Playing off that, what role does self-awareness play in leaders and in developing and leveraging the 5 talents?
Are you self-aware?
Not enough, Barry. Not enough. That would be my answer.
So that's at the rare end of the scale. The general answer is, I feel I'm pretty self-aware. And yet, when you talk to people in the organization, one of the things that they highlight in their CEOs is they don't seem to be that self-aware because they are doing things that they're not cut out to do. They intervene in issues where they don't have the strong capacity to intervene. And as a result, they diminish their brand and their standing within the organization as a result. I say that as a beginning to that answer, in order to show you that I agree with it, that self-awareness is critical to effective leadership. Leadership isn't about deciding what to do as much as it's about deciding what not to do. And when you don't have self-awareness, you spend too much time on things you shouldn't be doing. So when I observe CEOs and look at how they operate, it's very easy to pick that out. Other signs that we see in this lack of self-awareness are teams that take on too much, teams that feel overloaded, teams that feel lots of initiatives get started, but we never see them finish, things of that kind. So lots and lots of frustration being built. Now, what a self-aware leader does is learn when to back off to give the team control. They're the most dispiriting experiences that I've had where I've been given a task that the CEO needed to report every week to let me know on how it was progressing. I couldn't operate like that because I didn't feel as though he trusted me. So he'd given me the response with no accountability. So I think self-awareness is critical. And my worry is that too few people have got good answers to questions about their true capabilities. I think they downplay their good points and they replay their bad points ad nauseum. So the more you can shine a light on those capabilities, the more you can really boost them, I think the better the outcomes are. So if you look at an application of Barb's theory into the workplace, that's the kind of behavior you would expect to see occur, but we don't. So yeah, self-confidence, self-awareness, absolutely critical, Glenn, but I don't even think we're equipped to have a sensible conversation about what it even means.
All right. Good.
Yeah, a lot there.
John.
So Barry, let me ask you a little bit about leadership. So one of the questions, Glenn, I wanted to ask you, and there's probably a couple of questions in here, is what are your thoughts on level 5 leadership? Are those appropriate ways to think about leadership today?
I don't think level 5, as it was described by Jim Collins all those years ago, is a destination. I think what Jim Collins did, which was helpful, is get people to focus on the traits and dispositions of leadership that might make a difference. But to be fair to him, in Good to Great, where that theory of level 5 leadership came from, he wasn't conducting a psychometric analysis of leadership capabilities. He was trying to look at broader indicators of what made companies successful. And then he back into looking at the CEOs of those companies and seeing what he could find. One of the things he found was they were all white, they were all old, and most of them had grey hair or balding heads. Now imagine taking those as selection criteria for next level executive on the presumption we could get good leaders from that. You realize it would be going to be nonsense. So level 5 leadership is about, if you look at all the things that contribute to these leaders being successful, if you want to get to level 5, you've got to be humble. But then I get back to that comment I made earlier. Humility is non-predictive. As we looked at all the variables that impacted leadership performance, humility wasn't there. In fact, absent of other characteristics like what we show in the 5 talents that really matter, humility actually negatively correlates to success because it drives what we call likability behavior, where an affinity develops between leader and subordinate. Not a nice word. And as a consequence, it removes objectivity in evaluation. So if you're very friendly with a certain type of humble leader, very, very rare they'll hold a mirror up to you, tell you truths about yourself because they value the relationship more than the objectivity. Now, before everybody listening to this starts screaming because they can think of examples that contradict that, that is my point. Those examples prove the rule. And in those circumstances, level 5 leadership therefore contributed to an evolution of the discussion, but was in no way a definition of it. And I feel that way about a lot of leadership writing. And to be honest, I feel that about our writing too. I don't think the 5 talents that really matter is the destination. I just think we've advanced the needle a lot further and a lot farther into uncomfortable territory that I think will lead to other authors in the future, polishing their guns and sharpening their swords and trying to raise the quality of the debate about what effective leadership really means. So I tend to look at level 5 leadership in that way. And at this moment in time, I think it's a more negative impact than positive impact on how we think about leadership.
Right. So, this is very interesting. Before we started the podcast, we were just kind of chatting, and John and I shared with you that he and I were at a Jim Collins workshop in Chicago. It was about 3 weeks ago. And one of his questions for the audience was, what percentage of people can become level 5 leaders? And actually, what he asked was, what do we think he thought? And in discussion, and then he said he was greater than 75%. But, when we look at the definition of you, from what your research tells us, that those excellent leaders, right, that top quartile, is a much, much smaller percentage, right? They're opposite ends of the scale. And so is it possible to look at those two and say, wow, they are arguing against each other? Or is it really the definition of what you are saying is a world-class top leader versus what Jim is saying is a level 5 leader?
Well, if you go back to Good to Great, where the level 5 leader construct came from was an evaluation. Was it 17 companies they studied in the end? It wasn't a very large number of companies, but it was backtracking into those leaders from those qualifying data. Now, unfortunately, all those companies have since either failed, been sold, or are vastly underperforming. So, I think the title should have been Good to Great to this point. Because the story's been terrible, and he hates being asked about that in conferences, because I've also listened to Jim speak a few times and people have asked him that question. He does not like that question at all. If he thinks it's about 70% or 75% who've got that capacity to be level 5 leaders, he's truly delusional. He's delusional in terms of face validity, because if it really was the case that 75% of current leaders, because it almost applies to them also, right? If 70% of current leaders are deemed to have the capability of being level 5 leaders, there's very little data that would support that. So I would just go to an industry sector company ranking by growth, TSR, or whatever metric you want, and show how demonstrably false that would be. I think the other thing I would say is it really depends on what your standard is. And this is probably where I think Jim gets into a little bit of trouble, because you can never pin him down on his standards. So the question that we asked before you answered that question is, what criteria are you looking at? Okay. Now, if it's criteria in Good to Great, then it's pretty disastrous, because they all fail after that or didn't do very, very well. So if you don't believe that the outcome matters, anybody can do anything. It's irrelevant. It's not even a question worth bothering answering, because everybody can do it. So it'd be you'd draw your hand on a piece of paper, right? then what I will do is I get out the paper, I'll slap my hand on it, and I'll go around it like this. And then I'll do a few little rough moons for the nails, right? I've achieved the task. I've complied with the task. Now, if our standards admit that millions of people can do things that right now we don't think that they can, including me being an artist. When you establish the standard that it falls apart. Now, in our evidence, and we're looking at over 61,000 C-suite executives in large companies around the world, which is a rather larger number than Jim has ever studied around leadership. What we find is that 4% of leaders sit in the top quartile of an assessment database. 4 in 100. That's my number to that question that was asked of Jim in that conference hall. We came back and 70%. It wasn't. For us, it's 4 in 100.
That's phenomenal. And I know that we want to be thoughtful about time. A couple more questions. You talked a little about succession planning a few minutes ago. And as you were talking about that, you said, one of the most important things in succession planning, it could take 8 years to do it right. And you really start with your frontline leaders, which I think that's phenomenal insight. It's interesting, though, when we work with clients, one of the things that we're talking to CEO about is to be an A-player CEO, a top-performing leader or CEO, you have to build an A-player team. So if you don't have an A-player team, so for me, this is kind of priority. How do we think about this? And we're working with smaller companies up to, $500 million in revenue. So and it's interesting. I would say that almost every client I work with, their barrier to growth is the leadership pipeline. Right. It's not having enough of the right talent to be able to execute both strategy, to develop a strategy and execute consistently. But when you think about kind of your thoughts around developing frontline leaders, and then you got to have top talent at the top of the organization, is there priority to that when you think about that in a smaller organization, or how do you think you do that well?
The CEO first, and then ride the CEO's hard second. So, here's an interesting question, but I'll give you the answer that CEOs give to that question, and then I'll tell you the truth afterwards. Okay?
Yeah.
The question is, how many people on your leadership team are stronger than you are?
Yeah.
Now, a lot of CEOs look at that as an ego question, and they say, nobody. I'm the strongest player on the team. What they should say is, I've got at least 2 people who are stronger than me, but they can't get there because their ego won't let them. Now, starting there, that's where the problem is. And what I say to CEOs, I said 2 things on selection. The first one is you should be obsessed with finding somebody who's stronger than you to be on your leadership team. Now, for all reasons, they might not be ready to be a CEO yet, and they might not have the aspirations yet or the experience or whatever. They should be better than you in terms of measurable talent. We can help them with that. But then the second issue is this. Could you imagine appointing someone to your leadership team that you actively dislike? Now, the answer to that, in my view, should be yes. And I could tell you stories, John, from our past, where I worked with some fairly abysmal managers of mine. But it took a long time before I realized that they were actually good for me. But I would never have picked them to join the team. And that would have been on me. That would have been my fault. So in too many occasions, a lot of companies talk about the chemistry that develops between different candidates during the selection process. We brought them to dinner with their spouses, and we did this, or we had a chat about area. They just came across as a good fit for our company. The chemistry seems right. So whenever I hear the terms cultural fit, chemistry, assimilation into our culture, I go bullshit on all of it. Right? Because all that means is people like me. Why don't we have many Black executives? Because they're not like me. Why don't we have any female executives? Because they're not like me. And on and on and on. So we've got to cut through that nonsense. And we have to, I'm going to make progress with a CEO who says, it will be the pinnacle of my career if I had at least 2 people stronger than me on this team. We just don't find it, right?
Yeah.
They turned around and said, you see that? You see the CFO over there, CFO over there with sharp elbows. He's a bit surly and nobody likes him, but would be in jail without him, kind of thing. That would be music to my ears, but I don't hear it. One of the clients we worked with, John, where there was this, one of the leaders of one of the business units, and wasn't perfect by any means. Probably one of the best managers of people I've seen in my life. Couldn't be a CEO for reasons that I could explain, but I don't have time, but utterly brilliant. Here's what was brilliant about it. Everybody who knew him could name at least 10 top people in the company that came through his team. And one of the questions that CEOs hate answering when we ask it is, how do you feel about someone on your team getting promoted above you? How do you feel about it? Not, has it happened or do you want it to happen? How do you feel about it? Most people feel really insecure. They say things like, well, I'd be a bit concerned they didn't look at me first, bearing in mind I'm their boss, right? And you get all these kinds of needy responses of, look at me, why wasn't I considered, right? Look at me, I've been here than him, and anyway, he reports to me. I know more than he. You can almost hear it, right? It's deafening. Well, this guy that I'm talking about, we could probably identify 15 or 20 people that he celebrated because they worked for him, and now he works for them in lots of different capacities across the company. If we can get attitudinal shift like that, we're going to make progress on succession planning. But unless you're prepared to make an 8-year investment, but unless you're prepared to deal with people with kinds of characteristics so they don't become the blockers that people can't break through, you're never going to achieve succession goals, however you define it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Those are great point, Barry.
Yeah.
Barry, we could talk all afternoon. This is fascinating. And I know we had a chance to talk a couple times before and equally just learn a lot. And what I do love about you and your work is that you're not afraid, right? You're factually based. You've got a lot of great data and you're unafraid to say, hey, that's what I believe and this is what matters. So along that lines, if you were writing the CEO playbook, Barry, what are 3 things that you tell CEOs they should be doing if they want to be excellent leaders?
They should be doing. Well, let me start by how they should be thinking. One of the questions I ask of a very young CEO is when they wake up in the morning, is the dominant thought on their mind how privileged it is to lead and manage people, and that should make you feel excited. Do you get out of bed and feel that? Now, I hate to say, guys, but your doom loop suggests some people don't, right? But that, to me, will be the first question, because I'll tell you, I want the CEO in an organization that's positive, realistic, that's enabling, delegating, positioning people, celebrating people as it's possible to get. I don't want them detached from reality, right? I don't want them papering over the cracks. I want them telling me the truth. But if they can't give me a vision for the future that I can sign up to, then nobody else. So the first thing I would say is that would be an indicator I would look at, and I would want them to feel proud and privileged to lead people. And that's the sole focus of their. So that's number one. The second is, you left a job, don't keep doing it. You know,
Awesome.
it's very, very hard, to let go because they feel a bigger accountability. And the reason for that is they have a bigger accountability, but that doesn't mean you have to do everything. And one of the things that really annoys talented executives reporting to a CEO like that is they don't feel trusted. They don't feel that they've really been delegated authority to do something. So I would say to a CEO, if you're spending too much time trying to figure out how they are doing their jobs, the job that you should be doing is getting no attention at all. The third thing I would look at is the quality of the belief in humanity. Now, this is kind of a really big woolly theme, but I'm going to be fairly brief about it. Does the leader think good about people? In their general dispositions and their approaches to the world, they generally think good about people. Now, I've spent a lot of time studying rules-based organizations. Now, rules-based organizations are amazing places to look at because they have lots of rules. And rules-based organizations write down those rules. And they might start out with 20, but by 3 or 4 years, they're up to 40. They can always think of new things to establish a rule around. Now, I'm always principle-based, not rules-based. So I would rather trust a person to do something and have them fail than to legislate all the steps I force them through to prevent the failure. So I would look for a leader that's got that expansive way of thinking, where they're more principles-based than rules-based, where they're prepared to take a few risks with people, then people might fail and their career at that point. It's simply, well, you're not going to do it again because nobody wants to go through that unpleasant experience. But I'm giving you a chance to learn from it. And to me, that would be a wonderful thing. If it's such a big failure, it tends to have board visibility. And they get all antsy about, getting nasty questions from the board. Whereas I would turn around and say, look, shit happens. They're just going to learn from it. And, I'm going to apologize to you as the CEO to the board and say, it happened under my watch. I empowered this leader. This leader didn't deliver. That's on me because I didn't give them the support. I didn't give them the guidance. So I'd look for a leader like that. I look for those kinds of characteristics. You don't find them all that often.
Those are great, Barry. I mean, those are different. We've asked this question of every CEO we've worked with or that we've had an interview, and your perspective is uniquely Barry. So awesome for that.
And I think your number one and number two, they really do directly correlate to the CEO doom loop, because that's where we see a lot of times the CEOs who get in the doom loop are those who aren't strong in those areas.
I'm going to give you guys a question to think about. I don't want you to answer it now. You can have a discussion around it and thank me for screwing with your brains for asking it.
All right. Game on.
Would a CEO ever admit they were in the doom loop and then resign? Because I think that's an ethical question.
And then resign?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your doom loop reversible, right? I think the further down the front, it's hard to get back out, right? Now, when we were exploring black holes, so we sent these probes into black holes, they went over the event horizon, never seen again, couldn't get back out. Okay, and I think your doom loop's a little bit like that. It's a big swirling vortex, right? And some of these leaders are circling around the top, they're not quite getting sucked in, but they do. I think once they get down into the funnel, I'm not sure they can get out. So the question
is interesting, Barry. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. As you're saying that, I'm kind of thinking about engagement, right? So obviously in our time at Gallup, we studied a lot about employee engagement. And what I think is that as human beings, it's hard to always be at peak engagement, right? There's things that happen to us. You mentioned earlier, like I may have a sick spouse or my dog died or whatever it is. So I think there's things that occur in my engagement, although I'd like it to be very consistent, right? I think as human beings, the nature of people is inconsistency, is what I think most people struggle with. So when you think about it that way, I think the doom loop is, for me, as I think about it when I was there as a CEO, is there are some times where you get kicked in the teeth so much that you become a bit disengaged, right? I'll lose some of that passion because maybe I feel like I'm failing, or maybe I don't have all the answers, or whatever it might be. I think through counsel and reassurance and positive recognition, some things you just talked about, I think you can navigate your way out of it. Not all the time and not for everybody, but I think that it doesn't have to be a constant. I think being aware of it when you're there, and I can tell you when I was a young CEO at 31, there were times I was in the doom loop but didn't know it. And what I needed to do is I really realized that I had to find a way to get myself in a positive mindset every day, because exactly what we just talked about. I had to be able to lead these people. I had all these people looking at me to set the strategy for the company, to be successful, to put a roof, to be successful, to put a roof over their head or buy a car, whatever it was. And I just realized that in the enormity of that situation, a young person, it was very overwhelming for me. And then I said, instead of being a victim to it, like, what do I have to do? Empower myself to get myself in a better spot. Because I needed to do that for my people and for my family. So I don't know that you have to stay there all the time. I think your question is a really good one. Like if you're always in a doom loop, can't get out of it, yeah, you should leave. You're not in the right spot for sure. But I don't think it has to be a constant.
So if I own the concept of the doom loop, and I don't, you do, here's what I would do. I'd like you to imagine a 3-dimensional image of a tornado. We see the big hole at the top. So the widest part of the circulating air is at the very top of the tornado, and it goes all the way down to touch point on the ground. Okay, so it's like an inverted Maslow's hierarchy of need. Here's what I would do if I was you. I'd stratify the tornado or stratify the doom loop, and then I'd put characteristic indicators at each level. And then I've got a testable hypothesis and a working research model, because then I can start apportioning weightings to the variables that make it more difficult to scale. The question that you need to answer with the doom loop is, at what level is it inescapable?
Yeah.
So you could be probably right. I think you are, that if you're just spinning around the top and kind of bubbling up and down a little bit, your engagement's not that bad and so on and so forth. You can probably climb up pretty easily, right? But what if you're at 3 levels down? So the indicators at 3 levels down: high employee turnover, declining revenue, customer complaints through amber, low engagement scores. You might find that if they hit 75% of the indicators at any one level, you're screwed. In which case,
that's awesome.
Let's prepare you to get to level 4, because you're going to get there pretty quickly. So upend Maslow's hierarchy and then start apportioning weightings to criteria level by level by level, because I do believe there's a point of no return. I just don't know where it is. I think that too, and you don't know where it is, but there is a good answer to that question.
It's great insight.
Yeah, it really is. I think, John, I think there's a good follow-up for us. And Barry, one of the things with having the doom loop concept and having a model of it, I found for the CEOs I work with, many of them, it at least gives us kind of a third party, let's call it objective model, to say, oh, here's what I'm recognizing and here's where I'm seeing myself, help them get out of their own heads, and to help me as their counsel and coach and advisor, help them work through what is the roadmap to the point about to climb back out of that. Because to John's point, I found myself, many times in that same place. And I think about one of the things I did, I shared this before, was going back to doing my old job versus then leaning back into what should I be doing to be the CEO I can be. And part of that was around confidence, right? And so you talked before about your son and teaching children. If I had the wherewithal to say, okay, I'm going to lean back into where are my strengths as a leader? What got me here? Why am I leading this corporation? Versus going back down into a former zone of comfort, and just having the model to know that and understand it and work my way out, or having someone external to me, a third party, help me work my way out. That's where I've seen it really helping us so far.
The two of you, I think, are uniquely equipped to put some objectivity and data around this. And, what you could also do is weave your business model into that talk and say, look, no company can support you in every area, but here are the areas where we can support you. You kind of shade in the sections and say, hey, well, when it comes to measuring culture, we can offer this. So when it comes to coaching people for better performance, we can offer that. And you can show on the pyramid, on the doom loop, where that intervention would be necessary. I mean, that could be an interesting way of building the model. If I was in your situation, I'd trademark the damn thing. I'd get really straight out there, the doom loop, whatever the hell you need to do. But I would be all over it.
Check.
Own it. Right? Because I do think it's a very interesting concept. And I'd like to encourage you to keep going on it. And we can help you in any way, we'll be glad to do so. We
might be in touch. I think
thank you, Barry.
That's great perspective, Barry. It's something we really haven't thought about.
That is.
So we just talked about trademarking it literally in the last couple of days. So we're on that right now. But
and we do own we own the URL.
Oh, wonderful. Well done, guys.
Cool. All right, Glenn, you want to do the wrap up?
Yeah, Barry, this has been incredible. Really, really great conversation. Thanks again, Barry. And to our listeners, if you're feeling like you're in the CEO doom loop, or you have been, and would like more information, like to talk about how do you get out of that, how do you get on the upward spiral, reach out to John or I. And again, Barry, thanks so much.